Well, first of all, welcome to this meeting called Press Freedom, Whistleblowers, and the case of Assange, Manning and Carmody. My name is Ricardo Ortiz. I'm a past and founding member of the Frente Socialista de Puerto Rico. I'm also a contributor and a volunteer at Labor Fest and a labor activist and historian. Today, this very moment, we have the necessity and the importance of having this meeting because journalists and whistleblowers are under attack everywhere, from Julian Assange to Chelsea Manning to Bryan Carmody right here in San Francisco. When the President of the United States called journalists a scum and encourages his supporters to verbally and physically threaten journalists, the right of all journalists to do their work is threatened. The raid by the San Francisco police of Bryan Carmody's home and office in flagrant violation of the California Shield law is another example that press freedom is a local, national, and an international issue, and a class issue, I would argue. This forum will look at the issue of who is a journalist and the right of journalists to do their work. Although Julian Assange, the founder of Wiki Leaks, had been a member of the Australian's MEEAS media section since 2007, and this is a trade union that represents Australian media workers. The media, however, continue to argue that he's not a journalist and does not deserve to be protected. The use of a 1917 U.S. espionage law to target Assange now opens the way to charge all journalists and newspapers that use material for whistleblowers. This is a basic challenge to our freedom and the right to information. Actually, all the events that are happening right now in Puerto Rico, all these protests happen due to a whistleblower that delivered these messages through a system called Telegram to the Centro de Periodismo Independiente, which is an organization made and composed of independent journalists, and they were the ones that distribute this to the press and to the public and labor and civic organizations. So that's the importance of independent journalism. So we have to be aware of that, and we need to protect that. Right here, we have a couple of distinguished friends and personalities that will definitely talk to us about this necessity of defending and protecting the freedom of the press and whistleblowers. I will start with Mr. Bobby Egelko. He's a legal reporter to the San Francisco Chronicle, and he is very involved in, and very knowledgeable in the case of Bryan Carmody. Without any introduction and without any ado, please, Mr.
Thank you. It's kind of nice timing because, as you may have noticed from the paper the last couple of days, the first judge has ruled on the search, to put it very politely, of Bryan Carmody's home. Actually, police went there with a sledgehammer, held him in captivity for 6 hours, took his computer, his files, apparently had been monitoring his phone calls for a number of weeks. Maybe I should back up and say why. Carmody was known as a trade as a stringer. He makes his living and has for 30 years by getting videos and selling them to news outlets. And that's what he did here. He obtained, and we don't quite know how, a secret police report about the death of Jeff Adachi, the former public defender. It seems to have been leaked or disclosed by someone in the police department, probably illegally. It's meant to be confidential. Probably to embarrass Adachi because the death certificate, among other things, found he had cocaine and alcohol in his blood. And they naturally want to know where Carmody got it. One little inconvenience, we have this Shield law. It was approved by the voters some decades ago, and it says that journalists may not be required to disclose their sources or unpublished material. There's no such law federally, but close to half the states have them. The exception is if you obtain the material illegally. But the other exception, of course, is if he's not a journalist. And the question is, what did 5 judges at least issued search warrants to police to search this guy's home, to seize his records, to monitor, not wiretap, but monitor his phone calls. And you can't do that with a journalist. So why did judges do it? We got a little bit of a hint this week. The first judge to rule on it quashed the search warrant for his phone records. She hasn't said why yet, but according to another reporter that I talked to, what the police told the judges was that Bryan Carmody was a, quote, freelance videographer. Now, it's hard to say exactly what that means. Why they didn't say he was a freelance stringer or a journalist, I don't really know. But I mean, he took videos, and he was a freelancer, and he sold them. So 2 questions. Number 1, why didn't the police come right at it and say, well, Bryan Carmody happens to have an SFPD press pass, which he does. But number 2, why didn't the judges ask? I mean, there are 5 judges who issued these search warrants, and evidently not a one of them asked the police, what do you mean freelance videographer, assuming that that's what they told, and this comes via one of the police officers' lawyers. You know, you don't ask, you're not curious about who this guy is or whether he's protected by the Shield Law. Why does that matter? Because you can't even issue a search warrant for reporter sources. You've got to issue a subpoena that allows them to come to court and say, I'm a journalist, and you can't have my material, and the only exception is if you got it illegally. Question, does encouraging someone, does paying someone to release material mean you obtained it illegally? We don't know, but probably not. When I was checking on this, somebody told me about, for example, a California Supreme Court ruling in 1973. The LA Free Press had obtained names and addresses of undercover agents from a mail clerk at the Attorney General's office. And the paper, an editor and a reporter were charged with and convicted of receiving stolen property. Well, the court, back in 73, pre-Shield Law, unanimously reversed the conviction, said this stuff hadn't been stolen, because the clerk didn't steal it, he just was showing it, he or she was just showing it to the reporters, didn't intend to keep it permanently. Even on the federal side, in 1969, the 2 columnists you may have heard of, Drew Pearson and Jack Anderson, got some personal letters from staff of a U.S. senator and, wrote about it. I guess there was something newsworthy on it. And the senator sued him for invasion of privacy and receiving stolen property. And a federal appeals court said, columnists didn't steal the property, didn't ask anybody to do anything illegal, just asked for it. So is asking for material that may have been illegally obtained the same as obtaining it illegally? Logically, it seems not. Legally, I suppose we'll find out. And the same question, as I'm sure you're aware, arises with respect to Julian Assange. The charges against him, and my fellow panelists will go into this in more detail, espionage charges, the first time any journalist or person calling him or herself a journalist has ever been charged under the U.S. espionage law, brought against Assange in an amended indictment, 17 charges, each punishable by 10 years in prison. And of course, that's not the maximum for espionage. I mean, I grew up with the Rosenberg case, and you all probably remember it, and those folks were executed for espionage and pretty dubious evidence, particularly against Ethel, but that's another story. But nonetheless, Assange is charged with espionage for obtaining this material that Chelsea Manning disclosed, probably against the law. But Chelsea Manning did 7 years in prison, was sentenced to 35. Did Assange play a role in any law breaking simply by encouraging her, asking her for this material? Well, it's somewhat the same question as the question that's being raised against Carmody. The Trump administration's answer, according to a guy named John Demers, who's the head of the National Security Division in the Defense Department, was, we don't target journalists for reporting, but Assange isn't a journalist. After all, Assange didn't edit the files that he got, but simply put them out there, unedited, raw, including names of some confidential sources whose lives may have been in danger, though as it happened, nothing happened to them. You don't have to have been born yesterday to realize that that's not what the government objected to in the Chelsea Manning disclosures, is that they happened to disclose a few confidential sources. No, it was the collateral murder video that showed the U.S. helicopter, killing civilians, and a couple of Reuters journalists, and wounding some kids, and then saying, they shouldn't have been in the war zone, or condoning apparently torture by some of our allies and things like that. But nevertheless, their point now, their contention is, Assange isn't a journalist. Does that matter? Because if he isn't a conventional journalist, and I'm certainly not one to define that under law, he's at the very least a source for other journalists. And if he is guilty of illegally obtaining material by encouraging someone to disclose it with the promise that it will be printed. This, remember, was the 2010 disclosures, not the more recent ones in the 2016 campaign and the Democratic files and all. This is all the Chelsea Manning early disclosures. If he's guilty of that crime, then, I've been in this, I'm in my 50th year in this business, but we're in trouble, because then it becomes a crime, a felony, potentially punishable by death, to encourage and to publish secret material that may have been obtained illegally from a government source. Back to Bryan Carmody, it's pretty clear that the leaks, or whatever you want to call them, were against not just police department policy, but against the law. This stuff is supposed to be secret. What was his role in obtaining this? He doesn't seem to have stolen them. He doesn't seem to have unearthed them from the police files. That was some police officer. The police chief, Chief Scott, who initially defended the searches of Carmody's home, later on apologized and said, well, the officers weren't as clear as they might have been about Carmody's status as a journalist. And there's a certain amount of discontent in the police force, and particularly among the police union, about Scott kind of backing off and now pointing the fingers at his staff. Isn't the chief supposed to be responsible for what your lower downs do when they're searching homes of people who have reported embarrassing material? And it couldn't have been a secret to Scott that that's just what Carmody did. Now that investigation, both of the search and of the leak, has been turned over, we're told, to an outside agency. The police department's no longer doing it, and I guess that seems like a good enough move for conflict of interest purposes. In any event, on Tuesday, the first affidavit, that is, what the police told these judges, is scheduled to be disclosed, and then we'll learn more. But if in fact it is, this guy was a freelance videographer, never mind that he had a police press pass, questions arise about what the police withheld and what our judges, how our judges responded. Is this just how you do it? Do you rubber stamp search warrants because the cops say that these folks obtained things that they shouldn't have and release them to the public? Is it possibly that Mr. Adachi's role, hardly the favorite person on the police force or the DA's office, could that be entering into how all of this is handled? We don't know. Hopefully, my newspaper has some good police reporters following this closely will be in court. We'll tell you what the judges say, we'll tell you what the warrants say, and hopefully we'll put out enough information, hopefully we'll put out enough information that people can better assess how their local officials handled this. I haven't covered it firsthand. I wasn't in court for the judge's decision the other day to quash the search warrant, but I can tell you that just as a journalist who feels personally affected and a private citizen, I'm kind of astonished by the way the system seems to be working here, and I can only hope that as we go farther into this case, we learn more about who did it, why, and how we can change it.
Our next speaker is John Holmes. He's a longtime labor activist, and he's a member of the Media Workers Union, and as a retired printer. And currently, he's a member of the Executive Council of the Peralta Federation of Teachers. He's an instructor.
Merritt College,
Merritt
history.
College. Okay, so without further ado, John Holmes.
I'm very appreciative to Bob that you at least, besides a thorough presentation of what's going on in the Carmody case, about which I know nothing, that you also laid out at least the legal basics around Chelsea Manning's and Julian Assange's case, which I was not planning to go into extensively, but I will be talking about that from the standpoint of the political meaning of that and what is to be done about that, especially by the labor movement. So anyway, as has been said, I'm speaking here as a labor representative. And I'm going to focus mainly on Julian Assange's case, as that's been the one I've been most involved in. I've spoken at a variety of previous meetings and rallies. Some of you have heard me. And that there aren't more labor speakers today is tragic. In my opinion, any serious effort at protest here against the misdeeds of the U.S. government, any fight to stop the ICE raids and liberate refugees from the hideous U.S. government concentration camps, any defense of black people against police violence, indeed any mobilization of working people against the steadily increasing impoverishment we all are being subjected to, is unlikely to get very far without the backing of the only organizations working people have to defend themselves against the crimes of our corrupt, vicious, imperialist, white racist, male chauvinist, and generally just plain vicious ruling class that we have here in America, namely the labor unions. Okay. As has been mentioned, I've recently been elected to the Executive Council of the Peralta Federation of Teachers, teach history at Merritt, and until a year ago, I had another labor movement position, which is directly relevant to this. I and Steve Zeltzer, who unfortunately couldn't speak, were the Human Rights Committee of the Media Workers Guild. I, as a retired printer, worked at the Chronicle and various other newspapers for a couple of decades, and Steve as a freelance journalist. There's a freelance writers unit. I'll get back to that later. I'd like to talk about what the labor movement has been doing for Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning, but I can't. The labor movement should be behind their defense, but it hasn't been, except for passing the occasional resolution. And with Julian Assange, usually not even that. The San Francisco Labor Council did vote to endorse Julian's defense back in January, or at least to oppose his extradition to the United States. But that was basically only a paper endorsement. As far as I could tell, the Labor Council had no interest in doing anything about it. Evidence for that is the fact that I'm the only labor speaker here. I don't think there's anyone else here from the Labor Council, to be sure. Even though Labor Fest is something that is paid for by the labor unions, right? So it's not like they're unaware, okay? Now, for many years, the attitude in the labor movement and among liberals was not to touch the case of Julian Assange with a 10-foot pole. But lately that has actually changed a little bit, which is, I think, one of the reasons why we have a little bit bigger meeting today than at some meetings in the past. It's the Trump administration, which is running the campaign against Assange, that I've been hoping that other speakers would go to in more detail, but at least I think you're all generally aware of that. But they, until recently, had the full 100% support of the Democrats, whether mainstream or progressive or even socialist. We now have some socialist Democrats, as we all know. But now Donald Trump, who has praised Wiki Leaks in public when it was convenient for him, I remember he actually said, yeah, release more stuff about Hillary Clinton. People remember that. Is trying to get him deported to America to be tried, not for sexual misconduct or not for allegedly working with Putin, but for helping Chelsea Manning reveal the truth about U.S. war crimes in Iraq and around the world, okay? And now she's back in jail, as I hope we all know, for refusing to testify against Julian Assange, which is a very brave thing for her to do, considering she just spent 7 years in jail under often pretty hideous conditions. So that's a real statement to what kind of a person she is and why she's very much worth us all coming to her defense. So all of a sudden, the liberals, and especially the liberal news media organizations, who have often used Chelsea Manning's and WikiLeaks revelations, are a little bit more willing to oppose her prosecution than they used to be. But also, his prosecution, Julian Assange's, than they used to be. But also more than a bit less willing to defend Chelsea Manning than liberals used to be some years back, especially when Bush Jr. was president. Now, let's talk about Obama and Hillary, i.e. the Democratic Party. However much they hated Assange, and they definitely did, shrank back from going after him directly for what WikiLeaks revealed to the world, what Trump is now doing, being as Obama was supposedly against Bush Jr.'s war in Iraq, unlike Hillary, who never was. So they preferred to cook up that phony rape frame-up that the Swedish government finally dropped when they no longer needed it, what with all the hullabaloo, how supposedly Assange is an agent of Putin. And I wasn't planning to talk much about that because I didn't think I'd have a huge amount of time, but I think I'll get back to that at the end, because that's something that people need to understand. And not everyone here in this room has heard my riff about that before, okay? So though now the Swedes are thinking about reviving it, just in case Assange beats the rap in England of the attempt to extradite him back to the USA. And he, by the way, I should mention this, on the charge of jumping bail on charges that have been dropped. That's the kind of thing that, you know, a judge will usually give you a $200 fine in community service, right? Or something like that in America. Well, in England, they put him in jail for a year of it, and not only that, they put him in one of the worst and ugliest and nastiest prisons in all of England, which is, tells you a whole lot about what's really going on here, okay? So let's suppose that they can't quite push that through due to popular opposition in England, and instead, and so the extradition to the United States fails. The British Labour Party, by the way, who may well be the next government, their position is don't send him to the United States, send him to Sweden on the rape charges. That's the position of all the way up to the top, including the new socialist talking leader of the Labour Party. And so there's a lot of people who think, well, if he's in Sweden, he's safer from being extradited from to the United States than in England. That is not the case. If he is extradited to Sweden, the ridiculous rape charges can be dropped again like a hot potato after a perfunctory interview with him. And he can definitely be packed off to a U.S. prison because Trump has given the Swedes the perfect excuse. Under the U.S.-Swedish extradition treaty, one thing that you can definitely be extradited for is charges of espionage, and that's what he is being charged with. Now, some people say, well, that's no big deal because in the past, Sweden has refused to extradite various spies to the United States. So why would they do it in his case? What that fails to understand is that was in cases that the Swedes had no particular interest in. Sweden has excellent reasons to want to see WikiLeaks stopped. WikiLeaks has exposed U.S. atrocities in Afghanistan, and Sweden has troops there also. And guess what? It just so happens that Assange's main Swedish accuser in the rape case happens to be the cousin of the commander of Swedish forces in Afghanistan. I do not think that is a pure coincidence. We'll get back to that later. Okay. Now, this is the forum in defense not just of Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning, but of press freedom. Well, as I mentioned before, until last summer, Steve Zeltzer and I were the Human Rights Committee of the Media Workers Union, Bob's union. the Union of Press Workers. We got kicked out of that committee last summer as we kept bringing up human rights cases that our union leadership thought were too controversial. We never even tried back then to get the union to defend Julian Assange because we knew exactly what the response we would have gotten. The American labor movement in general, and the Media Workers Guild in particular, is feeble, battered, scared stiff, and generations deep in the arms of the Democratic Party, which, as anyone who watches MSNBC knows, hates Julian Assange like poison. Okay? So, for several years now, liberals and conservatives have been baying for Julian Assange's blood side by side. The liberals want him arrested for allegedly helping Donald Trump get elected by letting the cat out of the bag about Hillary Clinton's dirty dealings. I'll get back to that later. The Times, the New York Times, and other liberal mouthpieces like The Guardian in England, who published and made money off of news revealed by Wiki Leaks, turned on him and led the witch hunt against him. And then there are figures like Rachel Maddow of MSNBC, who I suspect all of us, just about all of us, have seen on the tube at one time or another, being that cable news is in the process of replacing regular news in America, who have basically called him a Russian spy in almost so many words. But then Trump decided to charge Julian Assange for espionage on the basis that, as Bob explained, he'd published Chelsea Manning's revelations about U.S. crimes in Iraq. Okay? And guess what? The liberal news media tycoons realized that since they'd published that stuff too, right, they could be charged for espionage too. And if you think Trump wouldn't do that, well, you don't know Donald Trump. Okay? So the New York Times, The Guardian, and other liberal outlets timidly started saying that, gee, these charges should really be dropped, and Julian should really not be extradited to the USA at any rate. Sweden, fine, but not the USA. Okay? That's the position of most of the liberal news media at this point. The conservatives, of course, have always basically had the position that both him and Chelsea Manning should be hanged for treason, essentially. Okay, so for me and Steve, that created an opening with our Media Workers Union, because the active membership of our union is employed by those same media tycoons, right? So our top union leaders naturally follow the lead of the employers. That's the way unions work in America, right? Those of you who are in the labor movement will know exactly what I'm talking about, okay? So Steve submitted a resolution, which I endorsed, to ask the Pacific Media Workers Union to adopt the resolution that the San Francisco Labor Council passed in defense of Assange, or at least against him being extradited to the United States of America. And the response was interesting. Now, that Human Rights Committee is pretty much defunct now that me and Steve are out of it. So instead, it got referred to the Legislative Political Committee of the union, which is made up, by and large, of people who are very loyal to the union leadership. Okay? And their members are all for it. And they unanimously, somewhat to my surprise, I must say, said, yes, we like John's resolution. We're passing it unanimously. So it goes to our executive committee. And our union leader these days, a Democratic Party politician named Kat Anderson, who has run for this and that, I think with the backing of the conservative wing of the Democratic Party, rather than the more liberal wing here in San Francisco, Kat Anderson. Her response, I got the email, was, gee, we're going to have to talk to the national union headquarters. Okay, so she did, and not being on the appropriate committees or getting the word from her on a regular basis, I don't really know how they responded. But what I do know is when the resolution in defense of Assange for the Leg Pol Committee went to the executive committee, it was voted down narrowly by a 4-3 margin. Okay. Now, we might have a chance to try to get the membership to reverse that at the next union meeting. That is, if anybody comes. For many years now, membership meetings, I think, Bob, have you ever been to a membership meeting? No. Membership meetings have been remarkably tiny due to the fact that a newspaper guild, even by union standards, is remarkably cooperative with the employer, and the members simply do not feel inspired to go to union meetings.
Well, if you have a membership meeting where the
Right.
agenda includes the vote
Yeah.
on the Assange resolution,
Right.
let us know.
Oh, yes. No, I assure you the next membership meeting, which I think is taking place in August, will definitely have Steve, and if I can make it myself there, trying to get it on the agenda, which might be, will be a fight. So, all right. But what this tells you is that the Pacific Media Workers Union is more timid on the subject of Julian Assange than is the New York Times. Now, here I'm just speculating, but because I don't read the Chronicle as much as I used to, but that may be reflecting the point of view of the San Francisco Chronicle, which is our main employer. Okay. Now, since I do have time, how much? I thought you said I had extra time.
Yeah, but since all the four
Okay.
speakers are here.
Okay.
We
All
have
right.
to make an amendment.
All right.
And you have also, already more than 20 minutes.
I've spoken more than 20 minutes?
Yes, sir. So
Okay.
let's
What I plan to talk about, which I won't be able to unless is the notion put about by the Democrats and the Rachel Maddows of this world that Julian Assange is a Russian spy, and the details of the rape case. And maybe we can get back to that in the course of discussion. I have 30 seconds. I'll just give you my conclusion, which is that by unmasking the people who run this country's everyday lies, intrigue, and wanton slaughter, brave whistleblowers like Chelsea Manning, Edward Snowden, and Julian Assange have done a great service to the entire world. These truth tellers have lifted the lid just a little bit on the dirty secrets of U.S. and world imperialism. But to get rid of the imperialist war crimes they've exposed once and for all, we need worldwide socialist revolution. And meanwhile, let's all unite to say hands off Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning. And Bryan Carmody.
So I'm Richard Stone. I'm a member of the San Francisco Labor Council. I'm a delegate, a Postal APWU delegate. And I was with the Economic and Social Justice Committee of the Labor Council that I'm a member of that I actually took Steve's the proposal that had made it both through the KPFA and Pacifica. At the first meeting that we had, it was actually met with a little bit of resistance and by members of mostly of AFT 2121, but thankful for other members of of the teachers at SEIU, as well as Gloria Lariva, who, as you know, happens to be a journalist, actually helped push, I say, the notion to actually have the resolution go forward. But Olga Miranda, who is a member, she's the president of the janitors union of SEIU 87, basically tabled. It says that it would require, an educational forum, which we actually had right here. It was Steve, Ann, and I, and I'm sorry, Ann. What was the name of the the lady who read it? The one who.
Oh, Nozomi Hayashi.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. And so it was basically, we're here where we had that discussion, and I think it was somewhere around the end of January.
At the LSB?
Not the LSB, the Julian Assange Educational Forum.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
That we had here prior to the eventual passing of the resolution, which actually happened during the February meeting at the Labor Council, though not without the friendly amendment, a friendly amended version that was made by the executive committee of the Labor Council, which made it difficult for for me and members of the Social Justice Committee tried to amend the language of espionage into the into the resolution, but we weren't able to do that. We went with the friendly, watered down version of it, which made the passage I could a little bit more than a small victory, but it was rather unfortunate to have an amended language because of all the resistance that we got, and of course most of it was centered in the then still defunct resolutions of the allegations of the women that he assaulted in Sweden. So, and like I said, this is all before the time of him actually being extradited from the Ecuadorian embassy and into where he's I guess it's in Westminster or whatever prison is, England, so, oh, Belmarsh Prison, okay. So, like I said, it eventually passed, but, the fact that we got, the resistance we did is just a reflection of a larger reminder, which I believe that you were talking about, the democratic control, of the Democratic Party, control of the, of not just the Labor Council, but people who had the committees. In my opinion, I've been with the Labor Council since 2007, so. I heard a little what I heard. I think that pretty much summarizes what it is that I wanted to say. The fact that I hear what sounds like you guys covered already, I won't do that. But I just wanted to, thank you for your time for allowing me to at least tell you what happened, because it was an important. We were the first at the time, but still, it shows you the type of resistance that that we're up against. Due to the difficulty that took for it to pass. Okay, thanks.
One clarification on Gloria LaRiva. She's actually the vice president of the Media Workers Union. In fact, she's the president of the printer sector. She was a printer. I worked side by side with her in the Chronicle composing room. And I've had my disagreements with Gloria, but she played a very good role on this. And I'm sure that she was one of the 3 votes within the Executive Council for pushing the resolution through.
I'm Ann Garrison. I write for the San Francisco Bayview, the Black Agenda Report, Counterpunch, Consortium News, Pambazooka News, and I produce a little news on KPFA. And public speaking makes me nervous, so I'm going to read my remarks here and do a few ad-libs. Okay, first I want to confess that I meddled in the 2016 presidential election. Okay, I was a satellite. I was running a satellite to Julian Assange's headquarters and command center for meddling in the 2016 election in London's Ecuadorian embassy. And my friend, Madame Blavatsky, you may have heard of Madame Blavatsky on KPFA's Twitwood radio. She's still out of breath too. She was also running a satellite of the Election Meddling Center on the astroplane, and she beamed my Stein Baraka sticker all over the planet. Twitwood Radio had another satellite, which was manifest over the airwaves on Sunday nights at KPFA, and Twitwood supported Julian Assange, but they've already been apprehended and kicked off the air. And I'm confessing all this to respond to CNN's faux exposés this week about how Assange had turned Ecuador's London embassy into an election meddling headquarters and command center with reinforced computer systems and networks and various individuals who might have been Russian coming in and going out with deliveries. The most important thing to understand about this is that CNN had absolutely no new information. They just threw all the stuff that everybody already knew into a mixer and added some newly alarming nouns like election meddling center, command center, and deliveries. This is all to keep this alive and to keep the propaganda about Assange going, even though there's no new information. Okay, now has anyone been listening to Michael Isikoff's Conspiracyland podcast? You're lucky. Okay, these are on Yahoo News. He's the so-called investigative reporter on Yahoo News. And he and I think David Korn, he's from Mother Jones. They wrote a book about Russiagate, in all seriousness. And now Michael Isikoff is running this Conspiracyland podcast once a week. You can find it on the Yahoo News website, although I don't recommend it. But these podcasts are meant to establish that Russia, working with WikiLeaks, stirred up the conspiracy theory that Seth Rich was assassinated because he had leaked the DNC and Podesta email to Julian Assange. Do people know who Seth Rich is? No. Yeah, okay. Seth Rich worked at the DNC, and some of us think that he may have leaked the DNC and Podesta emails to WikiLeaks. And he did have the access that would have made it possible for him to do that. He could have stuck a thumb drive in, copied the information, and gotten the thumb drive to Julian Assange, or WikiLeaks. Julian Assange is not all of WikiLeaks. But he could have gotten the leaks to WikiLeaks. And these are the leaks that liberal America is flipped out about because they're sure that the leaks gave the election to Donald Trump. Now, what's really twisted about this is that the leaks were real. These really were the communications of the DNC in which they were plotting to throw the nomination to Hillary. And there's a lot more. There's a lot more about unpleasant conspiring. Some having to do with the speeches, the Wall Street speeches that was such an issue. And one that was published, they were going to add a part that made it sound like they had our interests at heart, not just Wall Street's. But then they were worried, well, people might realize that this is a little long for a speech. But anyway, the DNC and Podesta emails, they're true. They're primary source material. But these people who think that these leaks threw the election to Trump basically think that Americans are not smart enough to access the information and then make their own decision for themselves. I mean, it's not an irrational decision to say that Hillary's really bad, but Trump is worse. They think that Americans should have been kept in the dark. This information should not have been released to them because it caused them not to vote for Hillary Clinton. Okay, now that was Seth Rich. Oh, and then Seth Rich was assassinated. Well, no, wait. He was shot. He was mysteriously killed in downtown Washington, D.C. when he was walking home from the Democratic National Headquarters. So, and he was a young man, about 30 years old, who was very patriotic and was working at the DNC because he really believed in the electoral process. So the proponents of Russiagate want us to believe that some Russian hackers got into the DNC and Podesta emails and then sent them to WikiLeaks. But you know what? I'm going to get too lost in this because there aren't enough people who know who Seth Rich is. If you go home, if you want to know more about this, Google Seth Rich. Yeah?
No. So I'm going to tell you that everyone who reads Breitbart knowledge or has Facebook feeds knows who Seth Rich is because he was used as part of the Lock Her Up campaign to sort of imply either overtly, explicitly, or kind of clandestinely that Hillary was responsible for that assassination of Seth Rich, and connecting the death of Seth Rich to Hillary was a huge propaganda campaign. So I guarantee you, while a lot of our liberal sources don't know anything, but
it's a point of order right here. Number one, I'm the chair, and we want the speakers to go through their positions. Due to a matter of time, we got to be out of here at a certain time. So,
okay, this gentleman believes what Michael Isikoff was saying in this Conspiracy Land podcast. But let's.
I don't believe that I'm saying.
Excuse me, point of order, sir.
Okay. He believes that it was a conspiracy to throw the election to Trump. Okay, so let's say that's enough about Seth Rich and the Conspiracy Land podcast. Isikoff, this writer who is a big proponent and writer about the Russiagate theory, he frequently, in these podcasts, cites the Mueller report as evidence. So we have to note that the Mueller report cites the corporate press. So they have this evidentiary, self-affirming circle going where the Mueller report cites the corporate press, then the corporate press cites the Mueller report. And the very first paragraph, the very first, the primary assumption of the Mueller report reads like this. Okay, this is the first paragraph. The Russian government interfered in the 2016 presidential election in sweeping and systematic fashion. Evidence of Russian government operations began to surface in mid-2016. In June, the Democratic National Committee and its cyber response team publicly announced that Russian hackers had compromised its computer network. Releases of hacked materials, hacks that public reporting soon attributed to the Russian government. Okay, and that's an example of Mueller citing the corporate press as a source. Okay, okay. Okay, so this continues. Releases of hacked materials, hacks that public reporting soon attributed to the Russian government began that same month. Additional releases followed in July through the organization Wiki Leaks, with further releases in October and November. Okay, now that is the premise. That is the premise that the Mueller report began with. They began with the assumption of what they were supposed to prove, and then failed to prove it. I mean, this report's a piece of work. Now, this might all be funny, I mean, the evidentiary circle between the corporate press and the Mueller report, if it were that so many people who are so flipped out by Trump's election are taking it so seriously. People whom many of us once thought sane. Lawrence Tribe, he's a professor emeritus at Harvard Law School, has been on about this ever since the election. The Russiagate story, the Democratic Party started spinning the Russiagate story as soon as Trump was elected. Lawrence Tribe is so obsessed with this, he's written a book about the Mueller report. He's giving regular podcasts about the Mueller report. There are reading groups reading the Mueller report, and Hollywood actors and Broadway actors have held dramatic readings of the Mueller report in New York. It's, you know, and there's no reason to this at all. Anyone with any respect for reasoned argument and evidence would laugh at this thing. But not a professor emeritus at Harvard Law School. Okay, now I'm just going to mention one set of WikiLeaks that are an example. They're important to me. And hold on, they're about Central Africa and East Africa, but they're not that hard to understand. This is about Burundi, a tiny East African country, east of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, south of Rwanda, and east of Tanzania. And it's also the endpoint of China's One Belt, One Road initiative into Africa. And so it's very, very geostrategic. The other reason it's geostrategic is its nickel reserves. It has very large nickel reserves. And it has signed, the government of Burundi has signed a contract with a Russian firm to mine these nickel reserves. And they say that the Russians offered them a better deal. Okay, but ever since they did that, the US and its European allies have been screaming that Burundi is a terrible human rights abuser, the worst human rights abuser in Africa, etc. And they've even suggested that there's a genocide about to happen, and or tried to stir up tensions in order to cause a genocidal war so that they would have an excuse to intervene, okay? And if they did, they would claim the nickel reserves in no time. Now, okay, what Wiki Leaks revealed in the diplomatic cables is that US and Western concerns have been trying to put a consortium together to mine these nickel reserves since the 1970s. So that's what this is. That's what this is all about. It's again the weaponization of human rights. And WikiLeaks makes it possible to prove that with little argument possible afterwards. Okay, so that's about what I had. Okay, I have a lot more favorite WikiLeaks, but I would encourage all of you to go to wikileaks.org and just search for what interests you. A certain country, a conflict, a bank, and see what you get. Now, the last thing I want to do is just ask everyone to sign up on the list. We've got one list for people who would like to see Pacifica Radio. Oh, that's another frightening thing. The frightening thing about how many people are taking Russiagate really seriously. I'd say about half the Pacifica Radio hosts and news reporters are taking it seriously. If you've been listening to KPFA, there are some shows where you would have been hearing about it for the last 2 years. So we have a list over here for people who are interested in the station board slate that has had enough of this. Now the station board doesn't have programming authority, but our slate for the station board, does everybody know what anybody know what the KPFA local station board is? Oh, 2, 3 people. Anybody listen to KPFA?
Yes.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. Okay, KPFA has an elected local station board. It doesn't have programming power, but it should have a program council. A program council is essential to community radio. It involves members of the community in one way or another. They're selected to review program proposals and make recommendations. Our group running for the station board thinks that there should be a program council and it should have some authority. So we have a list for people who want to hear. If you're a subscriber to KPFA, then you have the right to vote in the local station board election, and you should be getting a ballot soon.
My name is Dave Rana. I'm with the Bay Action Committee to Free Julian Assange. We've been organizing events, particularly on the days of Assange's court dates. So the next event is on the 31st of this month. It's going to be at the UK consulate, given that the UK is the one that is having the court procedure to try to get Assange here to the United States. So that will be at the UK consulate, which is 1 Sansome Street at Market. Now you can find that on the website. The website is bayassange.org, and by the way, the Twitter feed is also @bayassange. All right. There's another event that will be happening. So,
Montgomery Bar Station. More or less.
Okay, thank you. There's another event that will be happening on September 22nd. That will be another panel on Assange, Manning, and whistleblowers in publishing. That'll be at the Marxist Library on Telegraph in Berkeley. And I don't have the exact address on Telegraph, but that will also be on the website. So please come. And finally, I'll just mention that Orion here has regular vigils. His vigils are on Friday in Oakland at Fruitvale and Market. I'm going to be sending around this list. You can sign up here and we will get you on a...
Okay, in response to that, I'd like to say that you can go to wikileaks.org and search for Saudi Arabia or Israel or the United Arab Emirates. WikiLeaks became most famous when it leaked the collateral murder video. Has everybody seen the collateral? Okay, yeah. Okay, this was a video, Chelsea Manning leaked it to WikiLeaks, and when they published it, a video of American soldiers shooting at civilians from an Apache helicopter and joking about it as though they were playing video games. That went viral. WikiLeaks became famous. There are also the Iraq and Afghan war logs, which were leaked at the same time.
Well, there's, I guess, a conflict of interest between the people in power and the people who cover them. I spent some time in Sacramento in the mid-'70s to early '80s. And one thing I heard from a staffer there was that if the legislature could do it by secret ballot, they would vote almost unanimously to have all their meetings behind closed doors so we could hear them. It becomes more overt in certain administrations. I mean, I don't have to inform this audience of the current war against the enemy of the people by a president who applauded a congressman who body slammed a journalist or anything like that. But I guess I would say that one doesn't have to be even a fan of Julian Assange to fear and want to be vigilant about the implications of putting someone in prison for life for disclosing information, embarrassing information, important information about the workings of the government under several administrations. And I think that's every government, the Obama administration and the Bush administration and all, have felt themselves on opposite sides to the people who want to report what they're doing. Obama, to his credit, did not prosecute. Assange has had enough First Amendment concerns that he chose not to do it, and the prosecution that's being brought now is about events that took place during the Obama administration by a president who, as pointed out, applauded WikiLeaks and said, come on, expose them all. And wasn't it nice that the 30,000 tapes started surfacing the same day as the Access Hollywood tape of a presidential candidate and his past crudities. But be that as it may, irrespective of politics, there are folks out there who would rather not have us learn about and report what they're doing, and some are more willing to use the criminal law than others, but all of them prefer secrecy to disclosure. And being in this business, whether one calls it corporate media or something else, I'd rather let people know what they're doing to the extent that I can without endangering lives, and have them make more informed decisions about who to put in their government.
Yes, I think that this point may have been reiterated. It might have been said before, but I'll reiterate it if it has been. I think that we just need, formations of alternative parties. I can't remember the name. It's Nick Bryan's party. It's called the People's Party or something like that. I'm actually an active member of the Green Party. The Peace and Freedom Party, has been really active in the anti-war movement in terms of people who work at the answer, as well. As well as other parties as well. But still, it's just citing an example that we really need to have to work on wrestling control of the reins of labor from the Democratic Party, even sadly enough here in San Francisco.
In the back.
Yeah, I think this whole thing revolves around the whole concept of the national security state where I'm sorry, am I speaking too low?
Yes.
Okay. I think this whole thing revolves around the concept of the national security state and how the American public is being basically fooled into looking for the culprit on the outside versus the monster on the inside, which happens to be the Koch brothers, which have been influencing our elections for the past 2 decades or 3 decades already. Pretty outright. Greg Pallas has put forth incredible documentary information regarding how they do it and how they basically they're stealing elections right from underneath us. And now they're going to probably do it again with all those machines that they're using that are really, that can be intervened remotely as well. But the issue regarding Julian Assange is that this whole national security politics that the United States is doing, it's doing it in order to take away our First Amendment rights. In other words, it's been orchestrated this way in such a way, like you can tell by the H.R. 1 that was put forth, which was a House resolution bill, supposedly a civil rights bill, but in it, it actually has a requirement for the FBI to actually monitor third parties within the United States, to any third parties that are outside of the Democratic and Republican. They're supposed to be monitoring them for any outside influence of any other countries or anything like that. So what we're looking at is much bigger, and what is happening with Julian Assange is they don't want the same. They don't want to allow another Daniel Ellsberg.
Now, speaking as a historian, which I am, I want to say that it ain't just the Koch brothers, and it ain't something that started just after 9/11. Really, especially since World War II, when the United States became the Leviathan of the world, you had, I mean, it wasn't the Koch brothers who created all this stuff, it was Harry Truman, right? He was the one who invented the CIA, and a lot of this stuff got accelerated after 9/11, of course. But essentially, don't just look at the Koch brothers. They're just one part of a large, of what the American ruling class bipartisanly has been before, both Democrats and Republicans.
Okay. Yeah, and just a little point on Ellsberg, whom I admire. I think he's a very important figure in letting us know what was going on in Vietnam. He was entrusted with the secrets. He was directly prosecuted, and there wasn't much controversy that he could be. And it was probably for the salvation of all of us that it turned out that Nixon was trying to bribe the judge, and that they had raided the office of his psychiatrist and so forth. Julian Assange wasn't entrusted with those secrets. Chelsea Manning was, or the government was. So whatever one can say about Ellsberg, and perhaps Ellsberg and Manning risk some of the same thing, Ellsberg did it overtly, knowing the price he might pay, and it's unfortunate for him and the rest of us that he didn't. Manning, or rather Assange, relayed it from someone who also paid a price, the most severe price in the history of such things, and now is being prosecuted because he told us about it.
I want to say that at this point, with regard to the remarks about the right wing, and fascism perhaps, is that liberal Democrats are now so self-righteous about the fact that they believe Assange threw the election to Donald Trump. And they have to have somebody to blame. They want to blame the Russians and Wiki Leaks, I think, because they can't face what 30 years of neoliberalism have done to this country. How many people were desperate enough to vote for Trump, to vote for the other guy, whatever?
First, even before Harry Truman, the United States had spy agencies. I mean, who conducted the Palmer raids? Who deported hundreds of thousands of people out of this country? Who put down strikes? It's coming back to the argument that that woman over there made, the comrade. She said, it's the capitalist class. The capitalist class has something called the state, which is an organ of rule over the working class. And they will try to do espionage illegally or through their own, capitalist laws. So ultimately it comes down to questions of class rule. As long as we have the system and as long as we don't overthrow it, you can be sure that these things will continue. So we have to organize a workers' party that champions the needs of the oppressed and finally overthrows this system and establishes a worker state.
Okay. KPFA and Pacifica Radio have the same problem that the gentlewoman out here was talking about, age. But there's someone running for this local station board, one with our group, who is a young person who's very involved with the Democratic Socialists of America. And I think one thing we have to be realistic about is that after the 2016 election, the membership of Democratic Socialists of America soared, mostly because young people were joining, and they had been stirred up by Bernie Sanders. So it caused, okay, they didn't come and join the Green Party. They didn't come and join the Peace and Freedom Party. I wish they had, but they joined Democratic Socialists of America. And that's one reason I'm glad we have a woman, her name is Karina, do you know? Stenquist. Okay, and she shared like what's going on in DSA with us. So I think we might pay attention to DSA, and we might try to elect Karina to the local station board.
Actually, this is a very good question. I think it has a pretty simple answer. Bringing up the DSA is very relevant. What's been going on for the last years, it started with Occupy, which basically fed into the Obama campaign. And Bernie Sanders, the siren song of Bernie Sanders, claiming to be a socialist when in fact he's an FDR liberal, got a lot of young people out there to say, yes, I love Bernie Sanders, therefore I'm going to join a socialist organization, therefore I'm going to join the DSA. And guess what? The DSA is definitely not on the side of Julian Assange, because the DSA is loyal to the Democratic Party. So to bring the young people into the movement, you have to fight the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
And the DSA.
And furthermore, on the last point that you made, I actually talked to someone who's who's at a DSA meeting today, which is actually occurred in Alameda County, and they said that they actually have it's because that they don't have a position on Julian Assange, and the fact that what Ann was saying, we wish that some of the Bernie-crats would stay. Well, some of them actually did come to the Green Party meeting for a very short. Yes, it was nice to have a brief, yet a nice but yet brief versioning of youth, mostly youth coming to our meetings, the Bernie-crats. But you know what? They did go on to the DSA once it was formed, and yes, there's a sense of apathy that I think has a lot to do with these little triangles, or not triangles, but rectangles that we're just like staring into all the time, and I think that creates a sense of complacency and ultimately a sense of complicity against oneself, where the term, I can't remember who it was, but Chris Hedges said it, the term of inverted totalitarianism actually sets in on your own psyche.